The words hit me like a physical blow, echoing through the cramped back office of Bloom and Barrel Cafe where Jake had pulled me aside after our wedding planning meeting. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Emma and I have been talking, and we think it would be better if you weren't in the actual wedding photos. You know, the formal ones that go in the album and on social media." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. This was Jake Thompson, my best friend of 8 years, the guy I'd helped through his darkest moments, the one who'd called me his ride or die just last month. "What do you mean not in the photos?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes as he delivered the crushing blow. "Look, Sarah, you're amazing and we love you, but Emma's been working really hard to get in shape for the wedding, and honestly, having you in the photos might make her look bigger than she wants to look. You understand, right? It's nothing personal, it's just about the aesthetic we're going for. Nothing personal." As if telling your supposed best friend she's too fat to be photographed at your wedding could ever be anything but devastatingly personal. What Jake didn't know, as he stood there in his expensive athleisure wear explaining why my body wasn't good enough for his perfect day, was that I had already paid $28,000 to make his dream wedding possible. The venue he thought he'd charmed his way into booking, the photographer he believed he'd impressed with his fitness influencer status, the upgraded catering package that would make his reception Instagram-worthy, all of it paid for with money from the inheritance he didn't even know I had. Money from my father's construction business that I'd been quietly using to support my friends for years, while living in a modest apartment and driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic to maintain the illusion that I was just another struggling 20-something. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew what friendship meant. I'm 28 years old, 5'4", and yes, I'm what society would call plus-sized, though I prefer to think of myself as having curves in a world obsessed with angles. I work as a marketing coordinator at a small firm in Riverside Valley, Oregon, a place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets are supposed to be impossible to keep. Except I've been keeping the biggest secret of all for 3 years now, ever since my father passed away and left me his construction company, a business worth more money than most people in this town see in a lifetime. Dad always taught me that real wealth wasn't about what you displayed, but what you could do for the people you loved. "Money talks, Sarah," he used to say while we worked together in his office during my college summers, "but kindness whispers and whispers last longer." I took those words to heart, maybe too much to heart, because I've spent the last 3 years whispering my way through friendships that I'm now realizing were built on very shaky foundations. I met Jake and Emma during our sophomore year at Riverside Community College, back when I was studying business, and they were both pursuing their fitness and health degrees. Jake was this charismatic guy who could make anyone laugh, the kind of person who lit up a room just by walking into it. He had these big dreams of becoming a successful personal trainer, maybe even opening his own gym someday. Emma was quieter, studying to become a nurse, with this gentle way about her that made you want to confide your deepest secrets. They seemed like the kind of people who would stick by you through anything, the kind of friends you make movies about. Our trio formed naturally, bound by late-night study sessions, shared pizza runs, and dreams of the futures we were going to build. I was the practical one, the problem solver who always seemed to have a solution when things got tough. Jake was the dreamer, full of ambition and charm, but sometimes lacking in follow-through. Emma was the heart of our group, the one who remembered birthdays and always knew the right thing to say when someone was hurting. At least, that's how I remember those early days, before life got complicated and I learned the hard way that not everyone's definition of friendship matches your own. After graduation, we all stayed in Riverside Valley, drawn by the small-town charm and the promise of starting our careers close to home. Jake got his personal training certification and started working at Fitness First, the premier gym in town. Emma landed a position at Riverside General Hospital, working her way up from an entry-level nursing position. I took the job at Mitchell Marketing Solutions, not because I needed the money, though nobody knew that, but because I wanted the normalcy of a regular job, the routine of clocking in and feeling like I was earning my way in the world. What my friends didn't know was that 3 years ago, when my father had his sudden heart attack, everything changed for me in ways I couldn't have imagined. Dad's construction company, Mitchell & Sons Construction, was far more successful than I had ever realized. He'd been quietly building an empire while I was growing up, taking on major commercial projects throughout Oregon and Washington, accumulating assets and investments that would have made him one of the wealthiest men in Riverside Valley, if anyone had known the true extent of his success. But Dad was like me in many ways. He believed in living modestly and helping others without fanfare. When the lawyers read his will, I discovered that I was inheriting not just a house and some savings, but a multi-million-dollar business with ongoing contracts, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios that generated more passive income than I could spend in several lifetimes. The weight of that inheritance felt overwhelming, especially while I was still grieving the loss of the only parent I had left. My mother had died when I was 12, and Dad had raised me as a single father, teaching me the value of hard work and genuine relationships. People will try to get close to you for the wrong reasons once they know what you have. He'd warned me during one of our last conversations, when he was preparing me to eventually take over the business. The real test of friendship is what people do for you when they think you have nothing to give them in return. Those words haunted me after his funeral, especially as I watched Jake and Emma navigate their own financial struggles in the years that followed. Jake's personal training business was slow to take off, and despite his social media presence and obvious dedication to fitness, he was constantly stressed about money. His rent was always a struggle, his car needed constant repairs, and the gym wasn't paying him enough to live comfortably. Emma wasn't doing much better on a new nurse's salary, especially with the student loans from her nursing program hanging over her head like a dark cloud. So I started helping them, quietly and without fanfare, the way Dad had taught me. When Jake's rent was late, I'd win a small lottery scratcher's prize and insist on splitting it with my best friends. When Emma's car broke down, I'd happen to have a connection who could fix it at cost. When they wanted to go out to dinner but couldn't afford it, I'd suggest places and then conveniently forget my wallet, insisting they could pay me back later, a debt I'd never mention again. It became a pattern over the years, this careful choreography of making my friends' lives easier, without them realizing how much I was actually doing. I paid Jake's gym membership when he couldn't afford it, telling him the gym had given me a bring a friend for free promotion. I covered Emma's portion of group trips by claiming I'd gotten a work bonus and wanted to share the wealth. I even helped them with their rent during particularly tough months, always finding creative ways to explain away the money so they wouldn't feel charity dependent or question where a marketing coordinator was getting extra cash to throw around. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was secretly funding their lives, they often made comments about my own lifestyle choices. Jake, in particular, had developed an obsession with fitness and clean eating that bordered on judgmental. He'd make remarks about my food choices when we went out, suggesting I order salads instead of burgers, or offering to design a workout plan that would help me feel more confident. Quote, Emma would usually soften his comments with reassuring words, but I noticed she never directly contradicted him either. Their relationship began 2 years ago, and I was genuinely happy for them at first. They seemed perfect together, two attractive, health-conscious people who shared the same interests and life goals. I was honored when they asked me to be Emma's maid of honor, touched that they wanted me to play such an important role in their special day. But as their relationship deepened and their social circle shifted toward other fitness enthusiasts and health influencers, I began to feel increasingly like the odd one out. Their Instagram posts became a constant stream of couples' workouts, healthy meal prep sessions, and motivational quotes about discipline and self-improvement. I was notably absent from most of these posts, which they explained away by saying they wanted to keep their brand consistent. Jake had started building a following as a fitness influencer, promoting workout plans and supplement partnerships, and apparently my presence didn't fit the aesthetic they were cultivating. Still, I supported them in every way I could. When Jake's follower count was stagnating, I quietly hired a social media marketing firm to help boost his engagement, letting him believe his sudden growth was organic. When Emma wanted to get additional certifications to advance her nursing career, I anonymously paid for her continuing education courses through a scholarship I arranged with the local community college. I told myself that this was what real friendship looked like, supporting the people you love without needing credit or recognition. The engagement happened 6 months ago on a hiking trip to Crater Lake that I had secretly funded, though they believed they'd saved up for it themselves. Jake proposed at sunrise with a ring that was more expensive than he could realistically afford on his trainer's salary. But I didn't question where the money had come from. I was just happy for my friends, excited to help them plan the wedding of their dreams. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Without telling anyone, I began secretly funding their wedding plans. I knew they were dreaming of Sunset Ridge Vineyard, the most exclusive wedding venue in the area, but the deposit alone was $15,000, more than Jake made in several months of training sessions. So I called the venue directly, explained that I was a friend of the bride and groom, and put down the deposit under my name, arranging for them to believe they'd been selected from a waiting list due to a last-minute cancellation. The photographer they wanted, Golden Hour Photography Studio, was another $8,000 for the package that included engagement photos, the wedding ceremony, and reception coverage. Again, I made the arrangements privately, telling the photographer that I was handling the payment as a wedding gift, but that the couple shouldn't know the full cost because it would make them uncomfortable. I upgraded their catering package by $5,000, ensuring they'd have the premium menu with an open bar and specialty cocktails that would make their reception unforgettable. All told, I invested $28,000 in making their dream wedding a reality, money that meant nothing to me financially but everything to me emotionally. I wanted my best friends to have the perfect start to their marriage, the kind of celebration they'd remember forever. I imagined Emma crying tears of joy when she saw the venue decorated exactly as she'd envisioned, Jake's face lighting up when he realized they were getting all the extras they'd thought were beyond their budget. What I didn't anticipate was how the wedding planning process would gradually reveal the true nature of our friendship. As the months progressed and the details came together, I found myself increasingly marginalized in their wedding plans. Despite being the maid of honor, I was excluded from key decisions, told my opinions weren't needed because we've got it handled. When I suggested including some of our college friends in the wedding party, Jake dismissed the idea, saying he wanted to keep the group cohesive, which apparently meant young, attractive, and fitness-focused. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were planned without my input, and when Emma mentioned that she was thinking of having a destination bachelorette weekend, I offered to help with the planning and costs. She smiled sweetly but said Jake thought it would be better to keep things simple and local. Later, I saw on social media that they'd gone to Napa Valley for the weekend, a trip that clearly cost thousands of dollars but somehow happened without my knowledge or involvement. I told myself these were just wedding stress symptoms, that all couples became a little self-absorbed during the planning process. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I reminded myself that I was the one with the secret wealth, that it wasn't fair to expect them to include me in expensive activities when they believed we were all on the same financial level. I swallowed my hurt feelings and continued to be supportive, continued to be available whenever they needed help or advice. But the comments about my appearance were becoming more frequent and harder to ignore. Jake would make jokes about my workout habits, suggesting I should join him for training sessions to get wedding ready. Emma would offer to take me shopping for my maid of honor dress, insisting we needed to find something that was flattering for your figure. They'd make plans for group photos and then casually mention that they'd gotten some shots without me because the lighting was more even with fewer people. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago during what was supposed to be our final wedding planning meeting at Bloom & Barrel Cafe. We were reviewing the timeline for the wedding day, going over the schedule for photos, when Jake started talking about the importance of the images for their brand and future business opportunities. He mentioned that they'd decided to do most of the formal photos with just the wedding party and immediate family, keeping the group shots small and, quote, professional looking. I should have seen it coming when he asked to speak with me privately, leading me to the cramped office space behind the counter where the cafe's manager usually handled paperwork. The room smelled like coffee beans and vanilla syrup, usually comforting scents that would forever be tainted by what happened next. "Sarah," he began, and I could tell from his tone that whatever he was about to say had been rehearsed. "You know how much we love and appreciate you, right? You've been such an amazing friend, and we couldn't have gotten through this wedding planning process without your support." The word "but" hung in the air between us, unspoken but inevitable. "But Emma and I have been talking about the photos, and we think it might be better if you weren't in the formal wedding pictures. The ones that go in the album and on social media." I felt my stomach drop, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably, finally meeting my eyes with a look that was probably meant to be compassionate but came across as patronizing. Look, Emma's been working really hard to get in shape for this wedding. She's been doing 2-a-day workouts, meal prepping, the whole thing. And honestly, having you in the photos might make her look less fit than she wants to look. You understand, right? It's nothing personal against you. It's just about the aesthetic we're going for. The words echoed in my head as I tried to process what my best friend had just said to me. Nothing personal. As if telling someone they're too fat to be photographed at your wedding could ever be anything other than deeply, devastatingly personal. As if 8 years of friendship could be reduced to whether or not my body met their aesthetic standards. So you want me to be in the wedding but not in any of the photos? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Well, maybe just a few casual ones, he said quickly, as if this compromise made his request reasonable. Like during the reception, or some candid shots. But for the formal ones, the portraits and the group shots that really matter, we think it would be better to keep the wedding party to just Emma's sister and my brother. You know, keep it simple. Simple. That's what he called erasing me from the visual record of their wedding day. Simple. I stood there in that tiny office, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the sound of the espresso machine hissing in the distance, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't wedding stress or poor communication or even temporary selfishness. This was who they really were, who they'd perhaps always been underneath the surface friendship. They were people who saw me as useful but not valuable, supportive but not worth including, generous but not worth respecting. I need to think about this, I managed to say, though my mind was already racing toward a very different kind of decision. Of course, Jake said, relief evident in his voice that I wasn't making a scene. Take all the time you need. We just wanted to be honest with you about our vision for the day. Honest. Another word that felt like a slap across the face. If they wanted honesty, I was about to give them more than they bargained for. I walked back out to the main cafe area where Emma was waiting, scrolling through wedding hashtags on her phone, and sipping a skinny vanilla latte. She looked up with a bright smile, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just exploded in the back room. All set? She asked cheerfully. Jake said you guys were just going over some last-minute details. All set, I replied, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. As I drove home that afternoon, my hands shaking with a combination of hurt and rage, I made a decision that would change everything. If Jake and Emma thought I was too fat to be in their wedding photos, I was going to make sure they were too broke to afford any photos at all. $28,000. That's what their dream wedding was going to cost them once I withdrew my secret funding. $28,000 they didn't have, couldn't borrow, and couldn't possibly come up with in the 2 months before their wedding date. I was about to teach them a lesson about the difference between friendship and convenience, about the cost of treating people as disposable, and about what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. They wanted honesty? They were about to get the most honest moment of their lives. The first call I made when I got home was to Victoria Ashworth at Golden Hour Photography Studio. My hands were still trembling with a mixture of rage and determination as I dialed the number I'd memorized months ago, when I'd secretly arranged their photography package. Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice warm and professional as always. Golden Hour Photography, this is Victoria speaking. Hi Victoria, this is Sarah Mitchell. I need to discuss the Thompson-Rodriguez wedding photography package that I arranged back in March. There was a brief pause as she presumably pulled up their file. Oh yes, of course. The June wedding at Sunset Ridge Vineyard. How can I help you? Is there an issue with the timeline, or do you need to add additional services? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Actually, I need to cancel the entire package. I'll be withdrawing my payment and removing myself as the financial guarantor for their wedding photography. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice carried a note of confusion and concern. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying the wedding is canceled? Or are you asking to transfer the financial responsibility to the couple directly? I'm saying that I will no longer be covering the costs for their photography. If Jake Thompson and Emma Rodriguez want to maintain their booking with your studio, they'll need to arrange payment themselves. Otherwise, the contract should be considered void due to non-payment. Victoria's professional composure wavered slightly. Sarah, I have to be honest with you, this puts us in a very difficult position. The wedding is less than 2 months away, and we've already blocked out the entire day for their event. Our contract clearly states that cancellations within 60 days result in forfeiture of the full deposit, and the couple would still be responsible for 50% of the total package cost. I understand the terms, I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. I'm prepared to forfeit my $8,000 deposit. What I need to know is whether Jake and Emma have any legal obligation to pay the remaining balance if they can't afford it. Well, technically, since you are the one who signed the contract and provided payment, the financial obligation rests with you, Victoria explained carefully. However, if you're withdrawing your guarantee and they can't pay, we would have to pursue collection through legal channels, which honestly, for a small business like ours, isn't always worth the cost and effort. Perfect. That meant Jake and Emma would lose their dream photographer without any legal recourse, and Victoria's studio would simply move on to other clients rather than pursue a lengthy and expensive collection process against a personal trainer and a nurse who clearly couldn't afford an $8,000 photography package. I'll email you formal notice of my withdrawal within the hour, I told Victoria. I apologize for any inconvenience this causes your business. Sarah, Victoria said, her voice softening with what sounded like genuine concern. Can I ask what happened? When we met to discuss the package, you seemed so excited about being part of their special day. You talked about how much you loved them and wanted everything to be perfect for their wedding. I felt a bitter laugh escape before I could stop it. Let's just say I learned something important about the kind of love that gets returned. After hanging up with Victoria, I sat in my modest living room, surrounded by the carefully curated normalcy I'd maintained for 3 years. My furniture was comfortable but not expensive, my decorations tasteful but unremarkable. Everything designed to support the illusion that I was just another 20-something scraping by in a small town, working a regular job and living paycheck to paycheck like everyone else my age. The contrast between my humble apartment and the financial power I actually wielded felt especially stark in that moment. I could have bought the entire photography studio without making a dent in my inheritance, could have paid for 10 weddings, like the one I'd been secretly funding for Jake and Emma. But I'd chosen to live modestly, to be generous quietly, to prioritize relationships over recognition, and this was what that generosity had earned me. My next call was to Sunset Ridge Vineyard, arguably the most exclusive wedding venue in the Pacific Northwest. The vineyard was booked solid for 2 years in advance, and their $15,000 deposit requirement kept most local couples from even considering it as an option. When I'd called 6 months ago to secure Jake and Emma's date, I'd had to use every bit of influence my father's business connections provided, plus a significant financial incentive, to convince them to accommodate the booking. Sunset Ridge Vineyard, this is Amanda speaking. Hi Amanda, this is Sarah Mitchell. I need to discuss the Thompson-Rodriguez wedding booking for June 15th. Of course, Ms. Mitchell, we're so looking forward to hosting your friend's celebration. Is there something you need to adjust about the arrangements? The way she said your friends, with such warmth, made my chest tighten. Amanda had been nothing but gracious during our previous conversations, clearly impressed by my willingness to guarantee such a substantial payment for people who weren't even family members. She'd commented more than once about how lucky Jake and Emma were to have such a generous friend, how rare it was to see that kind of loyalty and support. I'm afraid I need to cancel the booking entirely, I said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. I'll be forfeiting the $15,000 deposit, and Jake and Emma will need to find alternative arrangements for their wedding. The silence that followed was even longer than Victoria's had been. When Amanda finally spoke, her voice carried a note of shock that she couldn't quite mask with professional politeness. Ms. Mitchell, are you certain about this decision? I mean, the wedding is less than 8 weeks away. Finding an alternative venue of comparable quality at this short notice will be extremely difficult, if not impossible. Most reputable venues are booked solid through the summer season. I'm aware of the timing, I replied. And yes, I'm certain. May I ask if there's been some kind of emergency or family crisis? If there's any way we could work with you to resolve whatever issue has arisen, we'd be happy to try. We value our relationship with you and your family's business connections. My family's business connections. That was the key phrase that reminded me exactly why Sunset Ridge had been willing to accommodate such a last-minute booking in the first place. It wasn't because Jake and Emma were particularly charming or deserving. It was because Mitchell & Sons Construction had built half the commercial properties in the region, and maintaining good relationships with wealthy local families was part of how exclusive venues stayed exclusive. There's no emergency, I said carefully. This is simply a personal decision based on changed circumstances. I appreciate your concern, and I hope we can maintain our business relationship for future events. Amanda's relief was audible. She'd clearly been worried that canceling this wedding might damage the vineyard's relationship with my family's construction company, potentially costing them future referrals and business opportunities. Of course, absolutely. We completely understand that sometimes circumstances change unexpectedly. We'll process the cancellation immediately and certainly hope to work with you again in the future. And Ms. Mitchell, if your friends do reach out to us directly about rebooking, I'm afraid our summer season is completely full. The earliest availability we'd have would be late October, and that would require full payment up front. Late October. By then, Jake and Emma's carefully planned June wedding would be a distant memory, their invitations already sent, their honeymoon bookings already made. There was no way they could push their wedding back 4 months without massive complications and additional costs they couldn't afford. My final call was to Cascade Catering, the company handling the $5,000 upgrade I'd arranged for their reception. This conversation was the shortest of the three, partly because the catering manager seemed less surprised by the cancellation. Apparently, last-minute changes were more common in the catering world, and they were accustomed to dealing with financial complications and shifting arrangements. We'll need formal written notice by tomorrow morning, the manager explained efficiently. Since you're canceling within 30 days of the event, you'll forfeit the full deposit, but there won't be any additional charges. I should mention that if the couple wants to maintain their catering service, they'll need to arrange payment for the basic package directly with us. The upgraded menu you arranged would no longer be available, but we could provide standard service if they can cover those costs. Standard service. That meant basic food, limited bar options, and none of the special touches that I'd arranged to make their reception memorable. Jake and Emma would go from having a premium celebration to struggling to afford basic catering, assuming they could find the money for even that level of service. By the time I finished making those 3 phone calls, I'd withdrawn $28,000 worth of support from Jake and Emma's wedding plans. In the span of 2 hours, their dream celebration had crumbled from a luxury vineyard affair to a logistical nightmare that they had no realistic way of solving. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt like I was being petty or vindictive, letting my hurt feelings drive me to hurt them in return. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, watching the late afternoon sun filter through my blinds, all I felt was a strange sense of relief. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't solving their problems. For the first time in my adult life, I was letting the natural consequences of people's choices play out without my financial intervention. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. Hey girl, just confirming that you're free for dress shopping this weekend. I found this amazing boutique that specializes in flattering styles for different body types. I think we can find something really beautiful for you. Different body types? Flattering styles. Even her attempt at kindness was wrapped in reminders that my body was the problem, that finding something flattering for my figure required special effort and consideration. I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering all the times over the years when I'd swallowed similar comments, convinced myself that Emma meant well, that she was just trying to be helpful and supportive. Can't make it this weekend, I typed back. Work is really busy right now. It wasn't entirely a lie. Work was busy, though not so busy that I couldn't have taken a Saturday afternoon to go dress shopping. But the idea of standing in fitting rooms while Emma selected a dress that would hide my body's supposed flaws, all while knowing that I wouldn't even be in their precious wedding photos anyway, felt like torture I wasn't willing to endure. Emma's response came quickly. Oh no, we really need to get this figured out soon. The wedding is less than 2 months away. What about next weekend? I'll let you know, I replied, then set my phone aside without waiting for her response. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Lisa, who lived in Portland and worked as a graphic designer for a sustainable fashion company. Lisa was 3 years older than me, whip-smart, and had never been particularly impressed by Jake and Emma during the few times she'd met them over the years. "Sarah," she answered enthusiastically. "This is a nice surprise. How are you holding up with all the wedding craziness?" "Actually, that's what I'm calling about," I said, settling into my favorite chair with a glass of wine. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you react." "Okay, now I'm worried. Are you all right? Did something happen?" I took a deep breath and started from the beginning, telling Lisa everything that had happened in the cafe office with Jake, everything about the years of secret financial support, and everything about the phone calls I'd made that afternoon. I'd never told anyone about my inheritance or about the extent of my help to Jake and Emma, and it felt both terrifying and liberating to finally share the truth with someone who would understand. Lisa listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I described Jake's comments about the wedding photos and her muttered, "Jesus Christ," when I explained how much money I'd been secretly contributing to their lives over the years. When I finished the story, the silence stretched for nearly a minute before Lisa finally spoke. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," she said, using my full name the way our mother used to when she was either very proud or very disappointed. "I am simultaneously furious at your so-called friends, and incredibly proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. You don't think I'm being vindictive? Or petty?" "Vindictive?" Lisa's voice rose with indignation. "Sarah, they told you that you're too fat to be in their wedding photos after you've been secretly funding their entire relationship for years. If anything, you're being too nice by not telling everyone in town exactly what kind of people they really are." Hearing Lisa's outrage on my behalf felt validating in a way I hadn't expected. For weeks, I'd been questioning my own reactions, wondering if I was being too sensitive about Jake's comments or reading too much into their behavior. But Lisa's immediate and fierce support reminded me that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. What they'd done was genuinely cruel, and my response was proportionate to their treatment of me. "So what happens now?" Lisa asked. "Do they know yet that you've canceled everything?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I imagine they'll start getting phone calls tomorrow morning when the vendors reach out to discuss the cancellations. I'm curious to see how long it takes them to figure out what happened." "And then what? Are you going to tell them why you did it?" That was the question I'd been avoiding all afternoon. Part of me wanted to confront them directly, to see their faces when they realized the extent of what they'd lost through their own cruelty. But another part of me wanted to let them figure it out on their own, to let the natural consequences speak louder than any speech I could give. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Right now, I just want to see what they do when they realize their dream wedding has evaporated. Whether they blame me or blame circumstances, whether they try to fix things or just give up entirely." Lisa was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Sarah, can I ask you something? What are you going to do with all this money you've been hiding? Because living like you're broke when you're actually wealthy seems like its own kind of prison." Her question hit deeper than I'd expected. I'd become so accustomed to my double life, so committed to maintaining the illusion of financial struggle, that I'd never really considered what I was sacrificing by keeping my inheritance secret. I was 28 years old with enough money to travel the world, buy a beautiful home, start my own business, or pursue any dream I wanted. Instead, I was living in a cramped apartment, driving an old car, and working a job I didn't particularly love, all to maintain relationships with people who apparently saw me as too aesthetically unpleasing to photograph. "I've been thinking about that," I said slowly. "Maybe it's time to make some changes. Maybe it's time to stop pretending to be someone I'm not, just to make other people comfortable." "Good," Lisa said firmly. "And Sarah? When this wedding drama explodes, and it will explode, you call me immediately. I want to hear every detail of their meltdown." Despite everything, I found myself laughing for the first time in weeks. "I will. And Lisa? Thank you for not telling me I should forgive them or try to work things out." Honey, some bridges deserve to be burned. Especially when the people on the other side of those bridges think you're too fat for their photo albums. After we hung up, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat on my small balcony, looking out over the quiet streets of Riverside Valley. Tomorrow would bring chaos and consequences, angry phone calls, and desperate attempts at damage control. Jake and Emma would discover that their perfect wedding had crumbled overnight, and they'd have to figure out how to rebuild their plans with resources they didn't have and options they couldn't afford. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not hiding behind false modesty or secret generosity. Not making myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort, but standing firmly in my own worth and watching the natural consequences of cruelty play out, without my intervention. The phone calls would come tomorrow. The drama would unfold over the coming weeks. But tonight I was just Sarah Mitchell, sitting on her balcony with a glass of wine, finally ready to stop being invisible in her own life. My phone buzzed one more time with a text from Jake. Hey, thanks for being so cool about the photo thing. Emma was worried you might be upset, but I knew you'd understand. You're the best, Sarah. Love you. I read the message twice, marveling at his complete tone deafness and casual dismissal of the pain he'd caused. He genuinely believed that telling me I was too fat for his wedding photos was something I should be cool about, something that required my understanding rather than his apology. I deleted the message without responding. By tomorrow afternoon, Jake Thompson would learn exactly how cool I could be when people mistook my kindness for weakness. And Emma Rodriguez would discover that some conversations have consequences that last far longer than the moment it takes to have them. $28,000. That's what their perfect day was going to cost them now that they'd have to fund it themselves. $28,000 they didn't have, couldn't borrow, and couldn't possibly come up with in 7 weeks. They thought I was too fat to be in their wedding photos. Tomorrow, they'd learn they were too broke to afford any photos at all. The first explosion came at 7:30 Tuesday morning, exactly 18 hours after I'd made my final cancellation call. I was in my kitchen, grinding coffee beans and enjoying the peaceful quiet of early morning when my phone started ringing with the aggressive persistence of someone who wasn't going to accept voicemail as an answer. Jake's name flashed on the screen, and I let it ring 4 times before finally picking up. Sarah, thank God, he said without any greeting, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. I need you to help me understand something. Sunset Ridge Vineyard just called me, and they're saying our wedding booking has been canceled. They said something about the financial guarantor withdrawing support, but that doesn't make any sense because we paid the deposit ourselves. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring both the rich flavor and the moment of reckoning that had finally arrived. That is strange, I said carefully. Did they explain what they meant by financial guarantor? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Jake continued, his trainer's usual confidence completely absent from his voice. They keep saying that a Sarah Mitchell was responsible for the booking and that she canceled it yesterday afternoon. But the only Sarah Mitchell I know is you, and obviously you didn't book our wedding venue. Obviously. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with assumptions and misconceptions that were about to crumble like a house of cards in a windstorm. I wondered how long I should let him flounder before revealing the truth, how much confusion and desperation I should allow him to experience before pulling back the curtain on 8 years of secret support. Maybe there's been some kind of administrative error, I suggested, my voice neutral and helpful in the way that had become second nature over years of being Jake's go-to problem solver. Have you tried calling them back to clarify the situation? I've called 3 times, Jake said, frustration bleeding through his attempts to stay calm. The manager, Amanda, keeps insisting that the booking was made and guaranteed by someone named Sarah Mitchell, who has business connections in the area. She said this person has been in contact with them for months about our wedding, handling payments and arrangements. I could hear Emma's voice in the background, asking questions that Jake was apparently too flustered to answer coherently. The sound of her worry sent a small pang through my chest, a reminder that despite everything, I had genuinely cared about these people and had wanted their happiness for many years. That does sound confusing, I acknowledged. What are you going to do? I don't know, Jake admitted, and for the first time in our 8-year friendship, he sounded truly lost. Emma's freaking out because the wedding is 7 weeks away, and we've already sent out invitations. Sunset Ridge says they can't offer us any alternative dates until October, and we'd have to pay the full amount up front. We don't have that kind of money, Sarah. We barely scraped together enough for what we thought we'd already paid. There it was, the admission that they'd been living beyond their means, planning a wedding they couldn't actually afford. I wondered if Jake had any idea how much the venue actually cost, whether he'd ever questioned how they'd managed to secure a booking at the most exclusive location in the region. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. $15,000 just for the venue, Jake said, his voice hollow with disbelief. Plus another $12,000 for the catering upgrade and $8,000 for the photographer. They're all saying the same thing, that some Sarah Mitchell was handling the payments and now she's withdrawn her support. $28,000. Hearing him say the numbers out loud, hearing the shock in his voice as he calculated the true cost of the wedding he'd taken for granted, felt more satisfying than I'd expected. For months, Jake and Emma had lived in a fantasy where their love story was so compelling that expensive vendors had given them deals and opportunities that other couples couldn't access. The reality was far more mundane. They'd had a wealthy friend who'd been secretly funding their dreams while they remained blissfully unaware of the true costs. "That's a lot of money," I said simply. "It's impossible money," Jake corrected. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way, but is there any chance you know something about this? I mean, it's just such a weird coincidence that there's another Sarah Mitchell in town who apparently has connections with all our wedding vendors." The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I'd thought Jake would need more time to put the pieces together, would require additional clues before making the connection between his mysteriously affordable dream wedding and his mysteriously helpful best friend. But financial desperation had apparently sharpened his deductive reasoning. "Jake," I said quietly, setting down my coffee cup and walking to the window where I could see the morning sun reflecting off the mountains in the distance. "There isn't another Sarah Mitchell." The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds. I could hear Emma's voice becoming more urgent in the background, could picture Jake's face as he processed what I'd just told him. "What do you mean?" he finally asked, though his voice suggested he already understood exactly what I meant. "I mean that I'm the Sarah Mitchell who booked your venue, arranged your photography, and upgraded your catering. I'm the one who's been paying for your dream wedding for the past 6 months, while you believed you were somehow getting deals and opportunities that other couples couldn't access." Another long silence, broken only by the sound of Emma asking, "What's going on?" "Jake, what is she saying?" "You," Jake said slowly, as if testing the words. "You paid for our wedding. I paid $28,000 to make your wedding everything you dreamed it would be," I confirmed. "And yesterday afternoon, after our conversation at the cafe, I canceled all of those arrangements." "Because of the photo thing?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. "Sarah, if this is about the wedding pictures, we can work something out. Emma and I talked about it last night, and maybe we were being too rigid about the aesthetic. Maybe we can include you in some of the formal shots." Some of the formal shots. Even now, faced with the complete collapse of his wedding plans, Jake was still trying to negotiate the terms of my inclusion, rather than recognizing the fundamental cruelty of what he'd said. He was offering me a consolation prize, a few photos where my presence would be tolerated rather than celebrated. "This isn't about the photos, Jake," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. "This is about what the photos represent. This is about 8 years of friendship where I've been valued for what I could provide rather than who I am as a person." "That's not true," Jake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sarah, you're one of my best friends. You know how much you mean to me and Emma." "Do I?" I asked. "Because yesterday you told me that my body was aesthetically unpleasing enough to ruin your wedding photos. You said it was nothing personal, as if asking someone to hide from cameras at your wedding could ever be anything other than deeply personal." I could hear Emma crying in the background now, the sound of someone whose carefully constructed plans were crumbling in real time. Part of me felt guilty for causing her distress, but a larger part of me wondered where these tears had been yesterday, when her fiancé was explaining why I wasn't good enough to be photographed at their celebration. "Sarah, please," Jake said, desperation clear in his voice. "I know I handled that conversation badly. I know I hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry about that. But canceling our entire wedding seems like such an extreme reaction. Can't we talk about this? Can't we figure out a way to work through it?" Work through it. As if years of taking my financial support for granted while gradually excluding me from their lives was a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with a heartfelt conversation and some compromises. "There's nothing to work through," I said calmly. "I made a decision to stop funding a wedding where I'm not welcome as myself. You and Emma are free to plan whatever celebration you can afford, but it won't be subsidized by someone you consider too fat for photographs." "We never said you were fat." Emma's voice came through the phone, though she sounded like she was crying. "Jake, give me the phone. Sarah, it's Emma. Please don't do this. Please don't destroy our wedding because of a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. They were going to reframe Jake's cruel dismissal as a simple miscommunication, a problem of poor word choice, rather than fundamental disrespect. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Emma," I said gently but firmly. "Jake was very clear about his reasons for not wanting me in your wedding photos. He said my presence would make you look less fit than you want to look, that having me in the pictures wouldn't match the aesthetic you're going for." Those weren't unclear words or poor communication. That was a deliberate choice to exclude me based on my appearance. "But we love you," Emma said through her tears. "You're my maid of honor. You're one of the most important people in our lives." "If that were true," I replied, "then you would have told Jake that his request was hurtful and unacceptable. You would have insisted that your maid of honor belong in your wedding photos because she's important to you, regardless of how she looks in comparison to anyone else. Instead, you agreed with his assessment and let him deliver the news." Emma's crying intensified, and I heard Jake take the phone back. "Sarah, what do you want from us?" he asked, his voice raw with frustration and fear. "Do you want an apology? Do you want us to promise you'll be in every photo? Do you want us to pay you back for the wedding expenses? Just tell me what it will take to fix this." The question revealed everything I needed to know about how Jake viewed our relationship. He saw this as a negotiation, a transaction where the right combination of words or promises could restore his access to my financial support. He still didn't understand that this wasn't about what I wanted from them, but about what I was no longer willing to accept for myself. "I don't want anything from you, Jake," I said. "I want you to plan a wedding that reflects your actual values and your actual budget. I want you to build a marriage based on what you can create together, not on what other people provide for you. And I want you to understand that friendship isn't a one-way transaction where some people give and other people take." "So that's it?" Jake asked. 8 years of friendship, and you're just walking away because of one conversation?" One conversation. He was reducing years of gradual exclusion, months of body-shaming comments, and decades of unrecognized financial support to a single moment of poor judgment. "I'm not walking away from 8 years of friendship," I corrected. "I'm walking away from 8 years of being taken for granted. There's a difference." I hung up before Jake could respond, then immediately turned off my phone to avoid the inevitable barrage of calls and texts that would follow. My hands were shaking slightly, but I felt a strange sense of clarity and lightness, as if I'd finally set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years. The coffee shop where I stopped on my way to work was buzzing with the low-level gossip that kept small towns running. Riverside Valley was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and major events like wedding cancellations spread through the community like wildfire. I ordered my usual latte and found a quiet corner table where I could observe the morning rush without being drawn into conversations. "Did you hear about the Thompson wedding?" I overheard one woman saying to her companion as they waited for their orders. "Apparently the whole thing fell through overnight. Emma Rodriguez was supposed to get her final dress fitting today, but she called the boutique crying and canceled everything." "No way," her friend replied. "Wasn't that supposed to be at Sunset Ridge? I heard they were getting some kind of amazing deal on the venue." "That's what makes it so weird," the first woman continued. "Sunset Ridge doesn't give deals to anyone. My cousin tried to book there for her daughter's wedding last year, and they wanted $30,000 just for the venue rental. $30,000. Even the gossip network had inflated the actual cost, turning my $15,000 venue deposit into an even more impressive sum. By the time the story circulated through Riverside Valley's rumor mill, Jake and Emma's canceled wedding would probably be worth $50,000. I sipped my latte and listened to the speculation swirl around me, fascinated by how quickly the narrative was forming. Some people blamed financial problems, others suspected family drama or cold feet. No one seemed to consider the possibility that the couple's treatment of their friends might have consequences, that cruelty could cost more than money. My phone, which I'd turned back on when I arrived at work, showed 14 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were from Jake and Emma, but several were from mutual friends who'd apparently heard about the wedding cancellation and wanted to know if I had any inside information about what had happened. Marcus Chen, my coworker and the closest thing I had to a potential romantic interest, knocked on my office door around 10 o'clock with a concerned expression on his face. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I heard through the grapevine that your friend's wedding got canceled suddenly. That must be really disappointing, especially since you were in the wedding party." Marcus was one of the few people in my life who had no connection to Jake and Emma, no investment in maintaining peace or avoiding drama. We'd been working together for 2 years, and he'd become increasingly important to me as a friend and potential romantic partner. He was kind, intelligent, and had a dry sense of humor that never crossed the line into cruelty. "It's complicated," I said, unsure how much of the story I was ready to share. "Want to talk about it?" Marcus asked. "I've got time before my next client meeting, and you look like you could use a friendly ear." Something about his genuine concern and complete lack of agenda made the decision easy. I found myself telling Marcus the entire story. From the years of secret financial support, to yesterday's devastating conversation about wedding photos, to this morning's explosive phone call with Jake. Marcus listened without judgment, his expressions shifting from surprise to anger to admiration as I described my decision to withdraw funding. "Wow," he said when I finished. "That's actually incredible." "Incredible?" I repeated, unsure if he meant it positively or negatively. "Sarah, you just taught 2 people one of the most important lessons they'll ever learn about how to treat the people they claim to care about," Marcus explained. "And you did it in a way that's going to force them to confront their own values and priorities. That takes serious courage." His validation felt different from Lisa's righteous anger or my own internal justifications. Marcus understood the business implications of what I'd done, the complexity of managing relationships when money was involved, and the difficulty of setting boundaries with people who'd grown accustomed to taking advantage of generosity. "Do you think I'm being too harsh?" I asked. "I think you're being exactly as harsh as the situation requires," Marcus replied. "Sarah, they told you that your body would ruin their wedding photos after you'd secretly paid for their entire celebration. If anything, you're being more generous than they deserve by not telling everyone in town exactly what kind of people they really are." The rest of the day passed in a blur of work tasks and avoided phone calls. Every few hours, my phone would buzz with another text from Jake or Emma, each message more desperate than the last. They ranged from angry accusations to tearful apologies to attempts at bargaining and negotiation. None of them addressed the fundamental issue of respect and recognition that had driven my decision. By late afternoon, the tone of their messages had shifted from anger to genuine panic, as the full scope of their situation became clear. They'd started calling other venues and vendors, discovering that their budget couldn't accommodate any location or service that would come close to matching what they'd thought they'd already secured. "Sarah, please call me back," Emma's latest voicemail began. "We've been calling places all day and everything decent is either booked or way out of our price range. The cheapest venue we can find is the community center at the Methodist Church, and even that is $3,000. We don't know what to do. Please, just call me back so we can talk about this." $3,000 for a community center. The reality of wedding costs was apparently hitting them like a freight train, as they discovered that their $15,000 Sunset Ridge experience couldn't be replicated for the few $100s they'd actually budgeted for their venue. I deleted the voicemail without responding and gathered my things to leave work. As I walked through the parking lot, I noticed Jake's car parked near the exit, and my heart rate spiked with anxiety. He was waiting for me, probably planning some kind of ambush conversation that I wasn't prepared to handle. Sure enough, as I approached my Honda Civic, Jake emerged from his BMW with the same determined expression I'd seen him wear during his most challenging personal training sessions. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled clothes of someone who'd spent the day making frantic phone calls and dealing with crisis management. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, positioning himself between me and my car door. "No, we don't," I replied calmly. "We talked this morning. You know my position, and I know yours." "My position has changed," Jake said quickly. "I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. I was wrong about the photos. You should be in all of them." Emma agrees. "We want you to be a full part of our wedding celebration." I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine understanding or merely desperate manipulation. What I saw was a man who'd spent the day discovering that his choices had consequences, who was now willing to say whatever he thought I wanted to hear in order to restore his access to my financial support. "Jake, do you understand why I canceled the wedding arrangements?" I asked. "Because I hurt your feelings about the photos," he said immediately. "And I'm sorry about that. I really am. I was thinking about it all wrong, focusing on the wrong things." "What were you focusing on?" "Image and aesthetics instead of the people who matter to us," Jake said, apparently proud of having identified what he thought was the right answer. I shook my head slowly. "You're still missing the point. This isn't about changing your mind about photos or saying the right words now that you're in financial trouble. This is about the fact that you felt comfortable asking me to hide from cameras at your wedding after I'd spent years supporting you financially and emotionally." "But I didn't know about the financial support," Jake protested. "If I'd known you were paying for everything, I never would have said what I said about the photos." And there it was. Jake's understanding of respect was entirely transactional. He thought my feelings mattered only because I'd been secretly funding his life, not because I was a human being deserving of basic dignity, regardless of my financial contributions. "That's exactly the problem," I said sadly. "My worth as a person and as a friend shouldn't depend on how much money I have or how much I've spent on you. The fact that you think it does tells me everything I need to know about how you really see me." I moved around him toward my car, but Jake stepped into my path again. "Sarah, please," he said, desperation making his voice crack. "I know I messed up, but don't destroy our wedding because of my mistake. Emma doesn't deserve this. She didn't say anything about the photos." "Emma didn't say anything," I agreed. "That's the problem. When the person you claim to love most was being cruel to one of your closest friends, you stayed silent. That's not neutrality, Emma. That's complicity." Jake's face crumpled as he realized that his attempts at negotiation weren't working, that I wasn't going to be manipulated back into funding their wedding through guilt or promises of better treatment. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Do you want me to grovel? Do you want me to admit that I'm a terrible friend?" "Fine, I'm a terrible friend. I took advantage of your generosity, and I treated you badly. Is that what you want to hear?" "I don't want to hear anything," I said quietly. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences, and that treating people poorly costs more than you realized. I want you to plan a wedding that you can actually afford and build a marriage based on who you really are, not on what other people provide for you." I finally managed to get around him and unlock my car door. As I settled into the driver's seat, Jake leaned down to speak through the open window. "Sarah, if you do this, if you really leave us hanging like this, our friendship is over," he said, apparently thinking that threatening to end our relationship would motivate me to restore his wedding funding. I looked up at him through the window, this man I'd considered one of my closest friends for 8 years, and felt nothing but sadness for how little he understood about what friendship actually meant. "Jake," I said gently, "our friendship was already over. You ended it yesterday when you told me I was too fat for your photos. I'm just the only one who's accepted that reality." I drove away without looking back, leaving Jake standing in the parking lot with the ruins of his dream wedding and the uncomfortable realization that his actions had consequences he'd never anticipated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new conversations, but tonight I was going home to the quiet apartment, where I'd been hiding my true self for years, ready to finally start living as the woman I actually was, instead of the diminished version I'd created to make other people comfortable. The explosion that followed my departure from the parking lot was even more spectacular than I'd anticipated. By Thursday morning, my phone had accumulated 47 missed calls and 63 text messages from Jake and Emma, their mutual friends, and even Emma's mother, who had apparently been drafted into the crisis management effort. The messages started with anger, progressed through bargaining and guilt-tripping, and had recently evolved into threats of legal action and social retaliation. "Oh no, we really need to get this figured out soon. The wedding is less than 2 months away. What about next weekend?" "I'll let you know," I replied, then set my phone aside without waiting for her response. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Lisa, who lived in Portland and worked as a graphic designer for a sustainable fashion company. Lisa was 3 years older than me, whip-smart, and had never been particularly impressed by Jake and Emma during the few times she'd met them over the years. "Sarah," she answered enthusiastically, "this is a nice surprise. How are you holding up with all the wedding craziness?" "Actually, that's what I'm calling about," I said, settling into my favorite chair with a glass of wine. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you react." "Okay, now I'm worried. Are you all right? Did something happen?" I took a deep breath and started from the beginning, telling Lisa everything that had happened in the cafe office with Jake, everything about the years of secret financial support, and everything about the phone calls I'd made that afternoon. I'd never told anyone about my inheritance or about the extent of my help to Jake and Emma, and it felt both terrifying and liberating to finally share the truth with someone who would understand. Lisa listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I described Jake's comments about the wedding photos and her muttered, "Jesus Christ," when I explained how much money I'd been secretly contributing to their lives over the years. When I finished the story, the silence stretched for nearly a minute before Lisa finally spoke. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," she said, using my full name the way our mother used to when she was either very proud or very disappointed. "I am simultaneously furious at your so-called friends, and incredibly proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. You don't think I'm being vindictive? Or petty?" "Vindictive?" Lisa's voice rose with indignation. "Sarah, they told you that you're too fat to be in their wedding photos after you've been secretly funding their entire relationship for years. If anything, you're being too nice by not telling everyone in town exactly what kind of people they really are." Hearing Lisa's outrage on my behalf felt validating in a way I hadn't expected. For weeks, I'd been questioning my own reactions, wondering if I was being too sensitive about Jake's comments or reading too much into their behavior. But Lisa's immediate and fierce support reminded me that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. What they'd done was genuinely cruel, and my response was proportionate to their treatment of me. "So what happens now?" Lisa asked. "Do they know yet that you've canceled everything?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I imagine they'll start getting phone calls tomorrow morning when the vendors reach out to discuss the cancellations. I'm curious to see how long it takes them to figure out what happened." "And then what? Are you going to tell them why you did it?" That was the question I'd been avoiding all afternoon. Part of me wanted to confront them directly, to see their faces when they realized the extent of what they'd lost through their own cruelty. But another part of me wanted to let them figure it out on their own, to let the natural consequences speak louder than any speech I could give. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Right now, I just want to see what they do when they realize their dream wedding has evaporated. Whether they blame me or blame circumstances, whether they try to fix things or just give up entirely." Lisa was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Sarah, can I ask you something? What are you going to do with all this money you've been hiding? Because living like you're broke when you're actually wealthy seems like its own kind of prison." Her question hit deeper than I'd expected. I'd become so accustomed to my double life, so committed to maintaining the illusion of financial struggle, that I'd never really considered what I was sacrificing by keeping my inheritance secret. I was 28 years old with enough money to travel the world, buy a beautiful home, start my own business, or pursue any dream I wanted. Instead, I was living in a cramped apartment, driving an old car, and working a job I didn't particularly love, all to maintain relationships with people who apparently saw me as too aesthetically unpleasing to photograph. "I've been thinking about that," I said slowly. "Maybe it's time to make some changes. Maybe it's time to stop pretending to be someone I'm not, just to make other people comfortable." "Good," Lisa said firmly. "And Sarah? When this wedding drama explodes, and it will explode, you call me immediately. I want to hear every detail of their meltdown. Despite everything, I found myself laughing for the first time in weeks. I will. And Lisa? Thank you for not telling me I should forgive them or try to work things out. Honey, some bridges deserve to be burned. Especially when the people on the other side of those bridges think you're too fat for their photo albums. After we hung up, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat on my small balcony, looking out over the quiet streets of Riverside Valley. Tomorrow would bring chaos and consequences, angry phone calls, and desperate attempts at damage control. Jake and Emma would discover that their perfect wedding had crumbled overnight, and they'd have to figure out how to rebuild their plans with resources they didn't have and options they couldn't afford. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not hiding behind false modesty or secret generosity. Not making myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort, but standing firmly in my own worth and watching the natural consequences of cruelty play out. Without my intervention, I'd need to learn more about the construction business, I admitted. I've been deliberately avoiding involvement with the company since my father died. But maybe it's time to change that approach. That's part of what makes this exciting, Marcus said, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm. You'd be coming into the business with fresh perspective and new ideas, not weighed down by assumptions about how things have always been done. We spent the next 2 hours discussing possibilities, sketching out potential partnership structures, and exploring how our combined skills and resources could create opportunities that neither of us could access alone. For the first time in years, I felt intellectually challenged and professionally excited about my future, in ways that had nothing to do with solving other people's problems. Monday morning brought another wave of pressure tactics from Jake and Emma's support network, but this time I was ready for them. Victoria Ashworth from Golden Hour Photography called with what she described as a "neat actual solution" to the Thompson-Rodriguez wedding situation. Sarah, I've been thinking about this situation over the weekend, and I have an idea that might work for everyone, Victoria said in her most diplomatic tone. What if we structured the photography package as a gift from you to the couple, but with your name prominently credited in all the wedding materials? That way, you get recognition for your generosity, and Jake and Emma get their dream photography coverage. The proposal was cleverly designed to appeal to what Victoria assumed were my motivations. She'd apparently concluded that my cancellation was driven by a desire for recognition, rather than a response to disrespectful treatment, and she was offering me public credit in exchange for restored funding. Victoria, I appreciate the creative thinking, but this isn't about recognition, I explained. This is about not supporting people who have demonstrated that they don't value me as a person. No amount of public credit would change the fundamental dynamic that led to this situation. But surely there's some way to work this out, Victoria pressed. I mean, they're your friends. Friends have disagreements and misunderstandings, but they find ways to move past them. Some disagreements can be resolved, I agreed. But some reveal fundamental incompatibilities that can't be fixed with better communication or creative compromises. This is one of those situations. After hanging up with Victoria, I realized that I needed to make a public statement of my own, not to defend my decision or engage in social media drama, but to clarify my position for the benefit of people who might be caught in the middle of the situation. I crafted a brief Facebook post that was carefully worded to be truthful without being unnecessarily cruel. I've received many questions about the Thompson-Rodriguez wedding situation, and I want to clarify that I made a personal decision to withdraw my financial support for their celebration after being told that my physical appearance would negatively impact their wedding photography. I wish Jake and Emma happiness in their marriage and hope they create a celebration that truly reflects their values and priorities. The post was deliberately understated, focusing on facts rather than emotions, but it provided enough context for people to understand the basic dynamics at play. Within an hour, it had generated dozens of comments, most of them expressing shock at Jake's behavior and support for my decision. I can't believe Jake actually said that to you, wrote Megan Silva, a mutual friend from college. That's so incredibly cruel and shallow. You deserve better friends than that. Good for you for standing up for yourself, added another commenter. Some people need to learn that their actions have consequences. Emma responded within 2 hours with her own comment. Sarah, this is a very hurtful mischaracterization of a private conversation. Jake never called you fat or said anything intentionally cruel. You're twisting his words to make yourself look like a victim when you're the one who's destroying our wedding out of spite. Her response perfectly encapsulated the dynamic that had driven my decision. Even faced with a factual description of what Jake had said, Emma was more concerned with defending his reputation than acknowledging the pain his words had caused. She was positioning herself as the real victim while accusing me of manipulation and spite. I didn't respond to Emma's comment, but others did. The thread became a fascinating window into how people interpreted situations like this, with some defending Emma and Jake while others expressed outrage at their treatment of me. What struck me most was how many people shared similar stories of being marginalized or excluded because of their appearance, and how validating they found my refusal to accept such treatment. Tuesday brought the most unexpected development yet. My phone rang just after lunch with a call from Gregory Brennan, the senior partner at Brennan & Associates, the most prestigious law firm in Riverside Valley. Ms. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue, Gregory began. I've been following the recent discussion about your situation with the Thompson-Rodriguez wedding, and I wanted to reach out because I believe there may be some legal issues that require your attention. Legal issues. I felt a flutter of anxiety, wondering if Jake and Emma had actually followed through on their threats to pursue legal action against me for withdrawing funding from their wedding. What kind of legal issues? I asked carefully. Well, it's come to my attention through various conversations around town that you may have made substantial financial contributions to this wedding under circumstances that could potentially be construed as fraudulent misrepresentation, Gregory explained. If the couple accepted services and made commitments based on the belief that they had secured legitimate vendor relationships, when in fact those relationships were dependent on your continued financial support, there could be grounds for claims of deceptive practices. I was momentarily speechless. Gregory was suggesting that Jake and Emma might have legal recourse against me for providing financial support they hadn't asked for and didn't know about. Are you representing Jake and Emma in this matter? I asked. Oh no, quite the opposite, Gregory said with a chuckle. I'm calling because I think you might need legal representation to protect yourself from potential claims. And more importantly, I think you might have grounds for your own legal action if they attempt to pursue any kind of harassment or defamation campaign against you. Gregory explained that several business owners in town had contacted him after hearing about the situation, expressing concern about Jake's fitness training business and his apparent pattern of accepting services he couldn't afford. There were questions about whether he'd misrepresented his financial situation to other vendors, and whether his social media claims about his business success constituted fraudulent advertising. The fitness industry is heavily regulated when it comes to advertising claims and business practices, Gregory continued. If Mr. Thompson has been promoting himself as a successful entrepreneur while relying on undisclosed financial support from friends, that could constitute misleading advertising under state business regulations. I hadn't considered that my decision to withdraw support might expose Jake and Emma to legal scrutiny of their own business practices and financial management. But as Gregory outlined the potential implications, I realized that living beyond your means and accepting services you can't afford can have consequences that extend far beyond personal embarrassment. I don't want to pursue legal action against them, I said. I just want to be left alone to move on with my life. That's completely understandable, Gregory replied. But I'd still recommend that we schedule a consultation to discuss your legal position and make sure you're protected from any potential retaliation. Sometimes the best defense is making sure people understand the strength of your position. Wednesday afternoon brought a development that caught me completely off guard. I was in my office, working on a marketing proposal for a new client, when my assistant buzzed to let me know that Emma Rodriguez was in the lobby asking to see me. Tell her I'm not available, I said immediately. She says she'll wait, my assistant replied. She seems pretty determined to speak with you. I considered calling security to have Emma removed from the building, but curiosity got the better of me. After 8 years of friendship and nearly a week of increasingly desperate messages, what could she possibly say that she hadn't already tried? Send her up, I said finally. But stay within earshot in case I need assistance. Emma entered my office looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was limp and unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and her face was puffy from crying. She sat down across from my desk without invitation and immediately began speaking. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. "This isn't just about our wedding anymore. Jake's business is falling apart because of what's happening. 3 of his biggest clients canceled their training contracts this week because they heard about the wedding situation and decided they don't want to work with someone who treats his friends badly." I felt a flicker of surprise. I hadn't anticipated that the social fallout from their wedding crisis would extend to Jake's professional life, but I supposed it made sense in a small town where personal and business relationships were often intertwined. "His gym membership sales are down 60% this month," Emma continued. "People are asking for refunds on packages they already bought. The supplement company that was sponsoring his Instagram content dropped him because they said his image doesn't align with their brand values anymore." The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake, who had been so concerned about the aesthetic impact of my appearance on his wedding photos, was now discovering that his own aesthetic had been damaged by his treatment of a friend. "I'm sorry to hear that Jake's business is struggling," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure what that has to do with me." "It has everything to do with you," Emma said, her voice rising with desperation. "You could fix this. You could post something on social media explaining that it was all a misunderstanding, that Jake didn't mean what he said the way it sounded. You could help restore his reputation." "Emma," I said gently, "Jake's reputation problems aren't caused by misunderstandings or poor communication. They're caused by his actions and choices. The community's response to learning how he treated me reflects their values, not my manipulation." Emma stared at me for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears. "You really hate us, don't you? After everything we've been through together, after all the good times and the support we've given each other, you're just gonna let our lives fall apart because of one mistake." "I don't hate you," I said honestly, "but I also don't think what happened was one mistake. I think it was the culmination of years of taking me for granted and gradually excluding me from your lives while still expecting me to solve your problems." "That's not true," Emma protested. "We love you. You're one of our best friends." "Emma, when was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed help with something or wanted me to join you for an activity, but just because you wanted to hear my voice and catch up on my life?" Emma opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently unable to recall a recent example. "When was the last time you asked me about my work, my family, my hopes for the future? When was the last time you remembered something important to me that didn't involve you and Jake?" The silence stretched between us as Emma struggled to come up with answers that we both knew didn't exist. "Our friendship became one-sided years ago," I continued. "I became someone who existed to support your lives and solve your problems, but I stopped being someone whose own life mattered to you. What happened with the wedding photos was just the moment I finally acknowledged that reality." Emma stood up abruptly, her sadness transforming into anger. "Fine," she said. "If that's how you want to remember 8 years of friendship, then I guess there's nothing left to say. But I want you to know that you're destroying more than just our wedding. You're destroying our faith in friendship, our ability to trust people, our belief that good things can happen to good people." "Good people don't tell their friends that they're too fat for photographs," I replied. "Good people don't take thousands of dollars in support for granted while excluding the person providing it from their lives. And good people don't try to manipulate others into accepting disrespectful treatment by threatening to end relationships." Emma left without another word, but her parting accusation lingered in my mind for the rest of the day. She'd tried to make me responsible not just for their wedding crisis and Jake's business problems, but for their fundamental understanding of human relationships and moral behavior. It was a staggering level of projection and victim playing, but it was also sadly consistent with the patterns I'd observed throughout our friendship. Thursday brought news that Jake and Emma had officially postponed their wedding indefinitely. The announcement came through Emma's mother, who posted on Facebook that the couple needed time to bacon and before they could commit to a celebration. The post was carefully worded to avoid mentioning the specific reasons for the postponement, but it clearly indicated that they'd given up on salvaging their June wedding plans. I felt a complex mixture of sadness and vindication reading that announcement. Part of me genuinely grieved for the dreams they'd lost, even though those dreams had been built on a foundation of my unacknowledged support. But a larger part of me felt validated in my belief that consequences were necessary and appropriate responses to poor treatment. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after my confrontation with Jake in the parking lot, I made a decision that felt like the natural conclusion to everything that had happened. I called the partners at my marketing firm and submitted my resignation, effective in 2 weeks. Then I called Marcus and asked if he was serious about our business collaboration proposal. "More serious than I've ever been about any professional opportunity," he said immediately. "Are you ready to stop hiding from your own success?" "I'm ready to stop living as a smaller version of myself to make other people comfortable," I replied. Saturday morning, I drove out to Mitchell & Sons construction headquarters for the first time since my father's funeral 3 years earlier. The building was exactly as I remembered it. A modest office complex that belied the scope and success of the business it housed. Gerald Mitchell, my father's longtime business partner and the Sons portion of the company name, greeted me with surprise and genuine warmth. "Sarah," he said, embracing me with the easy affection of someone who'd known me since childhood. "It's been too long. What brings you out here?" "I think it's time I learned about my inheritance," I said, "and maybe started contributing to the family business instead of just benefiting from it." Gerald's face lit up with excitement. "Your father always hoped you'd eventually want to be involved, but he didn't want to pressure you while you were grieving and figuring out your own path." We spent the morning touring the facilities, reviewing current projects, and discussing the company's future plans. Gerald introduced me to key employees, many of whom remembered me from childhood visits to the office with my father. Their enthusiasm for my potential involvement was touching and motivating in ways I hadn't expected. "The company is doing well," Gerald explained as we sat in the conference room that afternoon, "but we've been conservative about growth because we didn't want to overextend without clear leadership direction. Having you involved would change everything. We could pursue bigger projects, expand into new markets, maybe even consider acquisitions of smaller firms." The scope of possibilities was overwhelming but exhilarating. I could envision myself learning the business from the ground up, working alongside experienced professionals who'd been waiting for me to claim my place in the company my father had built. "There's one thing I want to do immediately," I said. "I want to establish a scholarship fund for local students pursuing construction and engineering degrees. Something substantial that could really make a difference in young people's lives." Gerald nodded approvingly. "Your father would love that. He always believed that the construction industry needed more young people with strong educational foundations." Sunday evening, exactly 2 weeks after Jake had told me I was too fat for his wedding photos, I received an unexpected text message from Emma. It was the first communication I'd received from either of them since Emma's office visit on Wednesday. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that Jake and I broke up yesterday. We realized that we were getting married for the wrong reasons, and that we're not ready to build a life together. I'm moving back to Portland to start over, and Jake is going to take some time to figure out his next steps. I don't expect you to care about this, but I wanted you to know that losing our friendship taught us something important about what really matters in relationships. I hope someday you can forgive us for not being the friends you deserved." I read the message several times, processing the unexpected development and the genuine note of accountability in Emma's words. For the first time since this entire situation began, she was taking responsibility for their behavior, rather than deflecting blame or making excuses. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on something simple and honest. "I hope you both find happiness and learn to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care for each other." Monday morning, I began my final 2 weeks at the marketing firm, training my replacement and wrapping up client projects. The work felt different knowing that I was transitioning to something bigger and more personally meaningful, but I was determined to leave professionally and maintain the relationships I'd built with colleagues like Marcus. "Are you excited about the change?" Marcus asked as we reviewed transition plans for the clients we'd be collaborating on through our new business partnership. "Terrified and excited in equal measure," I admitted. "It feels like I'm finally becoming the person I was always meant to be." instead of the diminished version I created to keep peace with people who didn't appreciate me anyway. That's exactly what growth looks like, Marcus said with a smile. Scary and exhilarating at the same time. 2 months later, I was settling into my new role as co-owner and marketing director of Mitchell & Sons Construction, when I received an invitation that surprised me. Ashley Johnson, Emma's former maid of honor, was getting married and had invited me to her celebration. I know things got complicated with Emma and Jake, Ashley's handwritten note explained, but I wanted you to know that watching you stand up for yourself inspired me to expect better treatment in my own relationships. I hope you'll consider joining us for what I promise will be a celebration that values all our friends exactly as they are. I decided to attend, not just to support Ashley, but to mark how much my life had changed since that devastating conversation in the cafe office 2 months earlier. I bought a beautiful dress that flattered my curves without apologizing for them, arranged to have my hair and makeup done professionally, and drove to the wedding feeling confident and genuinely happy. The ceremony was lovely, held in a garden venue with natural lighting that made everyone look radiant. During the reception, I found myself surrounded by people who seemed genuinely interested in my life, my work, and my perspective on things. Several guests mentioned that they'd heard about my new business venture and were impressed by my willingness to take on such a significant challenge. "You look amazing," said Carol Peterson, a mutual friend I hadn't seen in months. "There's something different about you. More confident, more present." "I feel different," I replied. "I spent a lot of years hiding parts of myself to make other people comfortable, and I finally decided that wasn't sustainable." Near the end of the evening, I noticed Jake across the room, apparently attending as someone's +1. He looked thinner than I remembered, less polished and confident than the man who'd built his identity around fitness and image management. When our eyes met, he hesitated for a moment before walking over to where I was standing. "Sarah," he said, his voice careful and subdued. "You look wonderful. Really happy." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by how neutral I felt seeing him again. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay," Jake said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Learning some hard lessons about what really matters. I wanted to apologize to you if you're willing to listen." I considered his request, weighing my curiosity against my desire to maintain the peaceful boundaries I'd established. "I'm willing to listen," I said finally. "I was wrong about everything," Jake said, his voice heavy with what seemed like genuine remorse. "Wrong about the photos. Wrong about friendship. Wrong about what kind of person I wanted to be. I took your generosity for granted for years. And then I had the audacity to judge you based on appearance when you'd been nothing but loyal and supportive." His apology was more complete and self-aware than anything I'd heard from him during the crisis 2 months earlier, suggesting that the consequences of his choices had genuinely prompted some soul-searching and growth. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I hope you're able to build better relationships going forward." "I'm trying to," Jake replied. "Emma and I breaking up was probably the best thing that could have happened to both of us. We were bringing out the worst in each other, encouraging each other's superficial values and entitlement. I'm in therapy now, working on understanding why I thought it was acceptable to treat people the way I treated you." "That sounds like important work," I acknowledged. We talked for a few more minutes about general topics, his plans to leave Riverside Valley and start over somewhere new, my business ventures and partnership with Marcus. The conversation was civil and even pleasant, but it lacked the warmth and easy connection that had once characterized our friendship. Too much had happened, too many fundamental incompatibilities had been revealed, for us to simply return to our previous dynamic. As the evening wound down and I prepared to leave, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed since that painful conversation in the cafe office. I was no longer hiding my wealth, no longer diminishing myself to accommodate other people's insecurities, no longer accepting poor treatment in the name of keeping peace. I was building a business partnership with someone who valued my intelligence and perspective, pursuing opportunities that challenged and excited me, and surrounding myself with people who appreciated me exactly as I was. The woman who had been told she was too fat for wedding photographs had become someone who understood her own worth and refused to compromise it for anyone else's comfort. The friend who had been taken for granted and gradually excluded had learned to invest her energy in relationships that were mutual and respectful. The secret benefactor who had hidden her generosity behind false modesty had stepped into her power and begun using her resources to create positive change in her community. 6 months later, Mitchell & Sons Construction had expanded into 3 new markets, established partnerships with 2 major development firms, and launched the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund, which had already awarded full college scholarships to 12 local students. My business partnership with Marcus had evolved into a romantic relationship built on mutual respect, shared ambitions, and genuine appreciation for each other's strengths. I never heard from Emma again after her text message announcing their breakup, though I occasionally saw updates about her new life in Portland through mutual friends. She seemed to be doing well, working as a nurse at a community health center, and apparently building relationships based on more authentic foundations than the ones that had characterized her time with Jake. The wedding that never happened became a cautionary tale in Riverside Valley about the importance of treating people well and the unexpected consequences that can follow from taking relationships for granted. But for me, it became something much more positive. The moment when I finally learned to value myself enough to demand that others do the same. Standing in my new corner office at Mitchell & Sons Construction, looking out over the mountains that surrounded the valley where I'd grown up, I felt profound gratitude for the painful lesson that had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my relationships and myself. Sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives become the catalysts for the most necessary growth. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up teaching us the most important lessons about our own worth and strength. Jake had been right about one thing. I was too fat for his wedding photos. But what he'd failed to understand was that his wedding was too small for someone like me anyway. 1 year after the wedding that never happened, I stood in the conference room of Mitchell & Sons Construction, presenting our quarterly expansion report to a room full of investors and potential partners. The numbers on the screen behind me told a story of remarkable growth and strategic success that even I had trouble believing sometimes. In 12 months, we'd increased revenue by 40%, expanded into 5 new markets across 3 states, and established ourselves as one of the premier construction firms in the Pacific Northwest. The scholarship program has become one of our most successful public relations initiatives, I explained to the assembled group, clicking to the next slide that showed photos of our scholarship recipients at various universities. We've awarded full 4-year scholarships to 36 students this year, with a particular focus on young women and minorities entering engineering and construction management programs. The community response has been overwhelmingly positive, and we've seen a significant increase in contract opportunities as a result of our commitment to workforce development. Marcus caught my eye from his seat near the back of the room, giving me an encouraging smile that still made my heart skip a beat even after 6 months of officially dating. Our business partnership had evolved naturally into something personal, built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared ambitions that had been missing from my friendship with Jake and Emma. Marcus saw my intelligence before my appearance, valued my contributions before my financial resources, and supported my growth rather than trying to diminish me to manage his own insecurities. After the presentation, as investors and partners mingled over coffee and pastries in our newly renovated lobby, I found myself reflecting on how completely my life had transformed since that devastating conversation in the cafe office. The woman who had hidden her wealth and lived modestly to avoid making others uncomfortable had become someone who used her resources strategically and unapologetically. The friend who had accepted poor treatment to maintain relationships had learned to surround herself with people who valued her contributions and respected her boundaries. "Excellent presentation," said Rebecca Martinez, the senior partner at Martinez Development Group, as she approached with her coffee. "I'm particularly impressed by your commitment to mentorship and education. It's rare to see someone so young taking such a comprehensive approach to community investment." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment with the confidence I'd learned to embrace over the past year. I believe that success comes with responsibility, and I want to make sure our growth benefits the entire community rather than just our bottom line." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes for sustainable partnerships. I'm hoping we can discuss the Portland waterfront project in more detail next week. Your company's reputation for quality work and ethical practices makes you ideal candidates for the lead contractor position." The Portland waterfront project represented the largest contract opportunity in our company's history, a multi-million-dollar development that would establish us as major players in urban revitalization projects. Landing this contract would mean not just financial success, but recognition as leaders in sustainable construction and community-focused development. As the reception wound down and our guests departed, I walked through the office spaces that had become my professional home over the past year. The walls were decorated with photos from construction sites, architectural drawings of completed projects, and framed articles from industry publications that had featured our company's innovative approaches to sustainable building practices. It was a far cry from the modest marketing office where I'd spent 2 years hiding my true potential and resources. Gerald Mitchell found me in my father's old office, which I'd finally claimed as my own 3 months earlier. The space had been lovingly preserved exactly as Dad had left it, but I'd gradually added my own touches while maintaining the sense of continuity and respect for his legacy. "Your father would be incredibly proud," Gerald said, settling into the leather chair across from my desk, "not just of the business success, but of the woman you've become, the way you've stepped into leadership, the community programs you've established, the integrity you bring to every decision." "I hope so," I said, looking at the framed photo on my desk that showed Dad and me at a construction site when I was 12 years old, both of us wearing hard hats and matching grins. "I think he would have been disappointed that it took me so long to embrace this role, but maybe I needed those years of trying to be someone else to appreciate who I really am." Gerald shook his head. "Everything happens in its own time, Sarah. You weren't ready for this level of responsibility 3 years ago, and that's okay. The experiences you had, even the painful ones, gave you perspective and strength that you might not have developed otherwise." His words reminded me of a conversation I'd had with my therapist just the week before. Dr. Amanda Foster, whom I'd started seeing 6 months earlier to process the complex emotions surrounding my friendship with Jake and Emma, had helped me understand that my pattern of hiding my wealth and accepting poor treatment hadn't been entirely unhealthy. It had taught me empathy, shown me the value of genuine relationships over transactional ones, and given me insights into how power dynamics can corrupt even well-intentioned friendships. "The key isn't to regret the years you spent supporting others," Dr. Foster had explained during our session. "It's to understand what you learned from those experiences and how they've shaped your ability to build healthier relationships now. Your generosity wasn't the problem, Sarah. The problem was that you were giving without boundaries and accepting treatment that didn't match your investment in those relationships." The therapy had been revelatory in ways I hadn't expected. I'd initially sought help to process my anger and hurt over Jake's cruel comments about my appearance. But I discovered that the real work involved understanding my own patterns of self-diminishment and people-pleasing that had made such treatment possible in the first place. "You have a tendency to make yourself smaller to accommodate other people's insecurities," Dr. Foster had observed during one of our early sessions. "You hide your intelligence, your resources, your achievements, because you're afraid that acknowledging your own power will make others uncomfortable or threaten your relationships. But what you're learning is that relationships built on that kind of false modesty aren't actually sustainable or fulfilling." The insight had been both painful and liberating. I'd spent years believing that love required self-sacrifice, that friendship meant prioritizing others' needs over my own, that being valued meant being useful rather than being valued for my intrinsic worth as a person. The wedding photo incident had shattered those illusions in the most brutal way possible, but it had also freed me to build connections based on authenticity rather than accommodation. My relationship with Marcus exemplified this new approach to partnership. When we'd first started dating, I'd been terrified that he was interested in me primarily because of my wealth or business connections. But Marcus had proven over and over again that he valued my mind, my perspective, and my company in ways that had nothing to do with what I could provide for him financially. I fell for you during that first conversation about boundaries and friendship, he'd told me one evening as we walked along the river that ran through downtown Riverside Valley. Watching you stand up for yourself, seeing the strength it took to prioritize your own worth over keeping peace with people who didn't appreciate you. That's when I knew you were someone special. Our relationship had developed slowly and deliberately, with both of us committed to building something based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than convenience or projection. Marcus had his own successful business, his own financial security, his own social circle and interests. He didn't need me to solve his problems or fund his dreams, which meant that our connection could be based on choice rather than necessity. The contrast with my friendship with Jake and Emma couldn't have been more stark. I realized now that I had never really known who they were as individuals, separate from my role as their problem solver and financial safety net. Our entire relationship had been built around their needs and my willingness to meet them, which meant that when I finally established boundaries, there was nothing left to sustain the connection. 6 months after our last conversation, I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Jake had moved to Seattle and was working as a personal trainer at a high-end gym while taking business classes at a community college. Emma had apparently thrived in Portland, working at a clinic that served low-income patients and volunteering with a nonprofit that provided health education in underserved communities. Both of them seemed to be building lives that were more authentic and sustainable than the image-focused existence they'd pursued in Riverside Valley. I felt genuine happiness for their growth and new directions, even though I had no desire to reconnect with either of them. Some relationships serve their purpose and then naturally end, leaving lessons and memories rather than ongoing connections. My friendship with Jake and Emma had taught me invaluable lessons about my own worth and the importance of boundaries, but it had also revealed fundamental incompatibilities that couldn't be resolved through better communication or mutual effort. The scholarship program that had grown out of my desire to use my resources more meaningfully had become one of the most fulfilling aspects of my new life. Like you've finally stopped carrying the weight of other people's problems. I feel different, I admitted, settling into the plush booth and accepting the wine menu from our server. For the first time in years, I'm not worried about what Jake and Emma need or how I can solve their latest crisis. It's incredibly liberating. Lisa raised her glass in a toast. To my sister, who finally learned that you can't pour from an empty cup, and that some people will drain you dry if you let them. Over dinner, I told Lisa about the escalating pressure campaign, the social media manipulation, and the complete lack of self-awareness that Jake and Emma were displaying as they tried to guilt me back into funding their wedding. Have they figured out how to pay for a new wedding yet? Lisa asked. Based on what I'm hearing through the gossip network, they're looking at the Methodist Church Community Center for the venue, Emma's mom is cooking the food, and Jake's cousin who bought a nice camera last year is handling photography, I said. Total budget appears to be under $2,000, which is probably closer to what they could actually afford all along. And how do they feel about their new budget-friendly celebration? I thought about the various messages I'd received, describing Emma's devastation and Jake's anger. They're treating it like a massive step down, like they're being forced to settle for something beneath their standards. There's no recognition that this might actually be more authentic to who they really are, or more appropriate for their actual financial situation. Lisa shook her head in amazement. After everything you did for them, they still can't see past their own entitlement. That's actually impressive in its complete lack of self-awareness. Sunday brought a new development that I hadn't anticipated. Marcus called around noon, his voice carrying an unusual note of excitement. Sarah, are you free for coffee this afternoon? There's something I want to discuss with you, and I think you're going to find it interesting. We met at Bloom & Barrel Cafe, the same place where Jake had delivered his devastating assessment of my photogenic worthiness just 1 week earlier. Sitting in that space felt like returning to the scene of a crime, but I found that the location no longer held any emotional charge for me. It was just a cafe where I'd learned an important truth about people I'd thought I knew. I've been thinking about our conversation earlier this week, Marcus began, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. About your background and your family's business connections. I have a proposition for you. Marcus explained that his marketing firm was looking to expand into commercial real estate promotion, specifically targeting the kind of large-scale development projects that Mitchell & Sons Construction typically handled. He'd been researching the industry and had discovered that my father's company was one of the most respected construction firms in the Pacific Northwest, with a reputation for quality work and reliable partnerships. "What I'm proposing is a business collaboration," Marcus said, his professional enthusiasm evident. "Your company needs marketing and public relations support to expand into new markets, and my firm has the expertise to provide that. But more than that, I think you and I could work together on something bigger than either of our current roles." The idea was intriguing on multiple levels. Working with Marcus would give me a legitimate reason to become more involved with my inheritance, to step out of the shadows and claim my place as the heir to a successful business empire. It would also provide a foundation for exploring the personal connection that had been developing between us over the past few months. The result was a smaller but much more satisfying social circle, filled with people who appreciated my successes rather than expecting me to minimize them, who supported my growth rather than benefiting from my stagnation, who valued my friendship for its own sake rather than for what I could provide. "I've been thinking about something Dr. Foster said in our session last week," I told Marcus as we prepared to leave the restaurant. "She pointed out that I spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, that caring for people required me to put their needs before my own. But real love, healthy love, actually involves mutual support and shared growth, rather than one person constantly giving while the other takes." "That sounds like wisdom earned the hard way," Marcus said, taking my hand as we walked toward his car. "The hardest way possible," I agreed. "But maybe that's the only way some lessons can be learned. Maybe I needed to experience the extreme version of unhealthy friendship dynamics before I could recognize and create healthy ones." 3 months later, I received an unexpected piece of news that brought the entire Jake and Emma chapter of my life full circle. Ashley Johnson called to tell me that she'd heard from a mutual friend that Jake and Emma had gotten back together and were planning a small intimate wedding in Seattle. Apparently they did a lot of growing apart and realized they wanted to try again with better communication and more realistic expectations, Ashley explained during our lunch at Bloom & Barrel Cafe. Emma reached out to apologize for how everything went down last year, and Jake apparently spent months in therapy working on his issues with entitlement and image obsession. I felt surprisingly neutral about this news. There was no jealousy or hurt, no sense of vindication or disappointment. Jake and Emma's relationship choices were simply facts that had no emotional impact on my current life or future plans. "Are you okay hearing about this?" Ashley asked, studying my face for signs of distress or reaction. "I'm fine," I said honestly. "I hope they've both learned from their experiences and can build something healthier together. Their happiness or unhappiness doesn't affect my life anymore." Ashley seemed surprised by my equanimity. "I thought you might be upset, considering how much they hurt you and how dramatically everything ended." "The hurt was real and significant," I acknowledged, "but it led to changes in my life that I'm grateful for. I learned to value myself, established healthy boundaries, built better relationships, and discovered my potential as a business leader. If Jake and Emma can also learn and grow from what happened, then everyone benefits from the painful experience we went through." That conversation with Ashley crystallized something I'd been processing in therapy for months. The wedding photo incident hadn't been a tragedy or a betrayal that had ruined my life. It had been a catalyst for necessary growth that had ultimately improved every aspect of my existence. The pain had been real and intense, but it had also been purposeful and transformative. 6 months after Ashley's update about Jake and Emma's reconciliation, I received my own unexpected romantic milestone when Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to the coast. We were walking along the same beach where I'd first envisioned buying the cottage that had become my weekend retreat, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Sarah," Marcus said, stopping suddenly and taking my hands in his, "I've been thinking about how much our lives have changed since we met, and how much better everything has become since we decided to build something together." I felt my heart rate accelerate as I recognized the serious tone and romantic setting that typically preceded major relationship announcements. "You've taught me what it means to be with someone who challenges me to grow while accepting me exactly as I am," Marcus continued. "You've shown me that real partnership involves supporting each other's dreams rather than competing or keeping score. And you've demonstrated every day that love can be both generous and boundaried, both supportive and independent." When he dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring box, I felt tears streaming down my face before he'd even asked the question. "Will you marry me?" he said simply. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life earning the honor of being your partner in everything?" My yes came through laughter and tears, a response that felt like the culmination of everything I'd learned about myself and relationships over the past 2 years. This proposal was everything that Jake and Emma's engagement had pretended to be, but never actually was. Genuine, mutual, based on deep knowledge and appreciation of each other's character, rather than image or convenience. As Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the woman I'd been just 2 years earlier, hiding her wealth and accepting poor treatment to maintain relationships that had never been authentic or sustainable. That woman could never have imagined the life I was living now. The confidence I'd developed, the love I'd found with someone who valued my mind and heart as much as he enjoyed my company. Our wedding, 8 months later, was everything that Jake and Emma's canceled celebration was supposed to have been but could never have achieved. Genuine, intimate, focused on the commitment we were making, rather than the image we were projecting. We held the ceremony at Sunset Ridge Vineyard, the same venue I'd originally booked for my former friends, but our celebration was funded by our combined resources and planned according to our actual values and preferences. Standing at the altar in a dress that flattered my curves without apologizing for them, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported both Marcus and me, I felt profound gratitude for the painful journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had once been told she was too fat for wedding photographs had become someone who understood that the right people would always want her in their pictures, and the wrong people weren't worth accommodating. In my wedding album, I'm visible and radiant in every photograph, not because I'd lost weight or changed my appearance, but because I'd learned to value myself enough to surround myself with people who valued me in return. The images capture not just a beautiful celebration, but the joy of a woman who had finally stopped hiding from her own life and started living it fully and authentically. 2 years after the wedding, that never happened. I sometimes drive past the Methodist Church Community Center where Jake and Emma ultimately held their budget celebration, and I feel nothing but gratitude for the lesson they taught me about the difference between being wanted and being needed, between being valued and being useful, between real friendship and convenient accommodation. The woman who had been too fat for their wedding photos had become too valuable for their limited vision of relationship and success. And that transformation, painful as it had been to achieve, was worth more than any amount of money I could have spent trying to buy acceptance from people who were never capable of appreciating what they had. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.